Hello and welcome to this interview with Lord Tariq Ahmad. He is the Minister of State for the Middle East and North Africa. Thank you for this interview.
It's a pleasure.
So, how serious is the UK about acknowledging a Palestinian state? The recent announcements of Lord Cameron were quite interesting.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, our long-standing policy has always been about a two-state solution, and what you're seeing is we're putting definition to what we mean by that. The world is seized by the tragedy of what's happening in the Middle East and the human suffering in Gaza. And as part of our positioning, there's been extensive diplomacy by Lord Cameron and myself as the Minister. Indeed, we've just returned from visiting. In his case, he was in Oman. I joined him in Saudi Arabia, and then we travelled on to Lebanon. He was previously in both Israel and the Palestinian territories. And what is very clear to us is that the situation needs to be really now seized in terms of the international community. There is real momentum, and to quote the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's foreign minister, create that irreversible momentum towards resolving this issue once and for all in a way which ensures the sovereign rights of the Palestinians are fully recognized.
But give me a timetable, please. What do you mean by we are ready to acknowledge a Palestinian state even before a peace deal?
No, what the Foreign Secretary has said, and just to clarify that and to give you the opportunity, we're undertaking on a process now. This process has begun. All countries are seized on every element of it, from the humanitarian situation, the suffering in Gaza, from the settlement expansion that we've seen in action. We've also taken on that in the West Bank. But one thing is very clear to us. At the end of all these diplomatic activities, the work that's being done on the humanitarian front, we must have that specific deliverable horizon to ensure that Palestinian state. We've got to give that hope, that future to the Palestinian people. I can't define the timeline on that because, as you know, the situation is very fluid. We're in extensive conversations and diplomacy with all key partners, not just the US, who have a big role, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia have an important role, but regional partners as well. And we need to effect change to ensure that positive vision is there for the Palestinian people. This can't be another opportunity just to try and paper over the cracks and not see a defined route to the two-state solution. And if I may, just on our position, to be very clear, what David Cameron has said very clearly is that we don't have to wait till the end of the process, this whole process unraveling, and Palestine. There is an important point in time on the issue of recognition, including at the United Nations, and the United Kingdom is very much focused at that to ensure that we lay the firmest foundations, the momentum that's required now, and the irreversible steps to ensure these are concrete. These aren't things like if the world's attention suddenly moves away from this tragedy, that there's a kind of stagnation or a stop in what we've seen. We need to ensure that the human tragedy that's occurred in the Middle East actually results. The biggest legacy, positive legacy we can give to every life lost is that we see this issue being resolved permanently, which means two sovereign states, Israel and Palestine, living next to each other in security and stability.
Okay, but the UK and among other countries have put sets of rules for this to happen. You want to see all hostages returned.
Released. I think that's a very important point.
And you want to see, and most importantly, which we need to understand, is that you want Hamas to leave Gaza.
Yeah. Now, first,
what do you mean by that? Who is Hamas, who is not? Especially when you lose 20, 30 people from your family. I mean, people are going to become more militarized.
Well, I mean, you and I have talked about this before as well. Hamas is a friend to no one. What we've seen in the tragedy that's unfolded, the killing of so many people, including women and children, close to 70% of those who've been killed in Gaza have been women and children. When even by Israeli accounts, the people of Hamas that have been killed is not what they perceive to be the target. And indeed, what is the removal of Hamas? What does that actually mean? It means that Hamas is no longer in control in Gaza. One of the conditions we are setting, and we're working on that, you would have seen from the public statements, is a real revitalized, re-energized Palestinian leadership. We've also been very clear that Palestinian governance of the Palestinian leadership should be over Gaza as well as the West Bank. And we're working to that end as well. But what is very clear, and you know the UK perspective, it's shared by many, we regard Hamas as an obstacle to peace. We regard Hamas as a terrorist organization here in the United Kingdom. We cannot have terrorists running Gaza.
Lord Ahmad, we know all of this. I need some of the behind the scenes talks because it's been months. It's been thousands of casualties. This is the 4th visit for Lord Cameron to the region. What's being discussed behind the scenes?
Well,
so where will Hamas go?
Well,
Hamas leaders.
I wish I could say they went yesterday. They are an impediment.
Where are they
to peace.
going? There are discussions and there are plans.
And you will appreciate.
You must be talking about.
Of course
certain
we
things.
are, but I'm not going to start. There are a lot of sensitive and discreet and important discussions happening with all our partners. Lord Cameron, and to his credit, I think when we visited Lebanon in the last 7-8 weeks, that was the 12th country he visited. And I've been also extensively engaged. Why have we been engaging? I can't tell you all the details of every single confidential discussion we've been having with partners.
Well,
you know this.
I want to know.
Now, of course you know. That's your job. And my job is to say to you, had we not been, we're not just going there for the sake of it. This is serious. This is in my time.
Nothing has been accomplished.
But
There's no
ceasefire.
Well, the humanitarian aid, even UNRWA has stopped the funding.
Okay,
has
let
stopped
me unpack
UNRWA.
that for you in turn. First of all, on the humanitarian aid, I accept the principle you're saying. It's shocking lack of trucks going through. But that doesn't mean, if you believe in something, if you're principled about something, we want to see Arabs operating, we want to see Karim Shalom fully operating. The points when David Cameron visited Israel, quite directly to the senior leadership, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, who he spent an hour with, these weren't specific just bilateral talks. These were quite specific to the situation in Gaza. Yes, we want to see first and foremost humanitarian suffering. Everyone does. You and I have talked about this. It cannot be right that we allow, if I can just finish this point, that famine occurs in Gaza. We need to stop it. It's not just my responsibility as the minister in the UK. It's a collective human responsibility. And it's also the responsibility of Israel to recognize that.
Okay, so you cannot tell me confidential things. You don't want to ruin the deal. But how close are we to a deal?
Well, you've seen, first of all, on the hostages and the issue of access, I think we are very much positive in positive space. I pay tribute particularly to our Qatari colleagues who've been central to this. There's been a lot of speculation. I think we're moving very near to that. There's a few details which need to be finalized. What I think we do need, and we've been articulating this very clearly, the situation, the conflict needs to end now in the sense of allowing that space, the humanitarian pause, as the Foreign Secretary has called it, to get aid in and hostages out. Now, that's the summary of it. The detail of that means to ensure the situation in terms of where all the hostages are held, they can be brought to a place where their release can be guaranteed. And I assure you, you mentioned about confidentiality, it's not just government to government. David and I have been meeting regularly with the hostage families. We've been meeting regularly with the NGOs. And you also mentioned UNRWA, and I want to address that point. First and foremost, UNRWA have done an incredible job. They've been the backbone, if I can put it that way, on the humanitarian relief. We've been long-standing supporters. And to be clear on the UK's position, the funding we've released for this current tax year, that is still operational, that's gone out to people, that's working. We're also working with other organisations like the World Food Programme and UNICEF. But there is this review, which the Secretary General of the UN has said. We're fully engaged with that as one of the major funders of UNRWA, and we want this review to be completed as soon as possible. The people of Gaza need, and we will be looking at options to ensure the support that they need, the humanitarian access, which at the moment is far from enough to get the aid they need, reaches the people who need it most.
Is Qatar ready to take more Hamas leaders in?
I can't comment on that. That's a matter for Qatar. What I do recognize is that
which country is ready to
well,
take
I think,
Hamas
as I
leaders?
said, we talked about which discussions, where they are. One thing that the UK's position is very clear on is we cannot have Hamas is an impediment to peace, and we can't have Hamas in
Is
control.
the Palestinian Authority ready to take over Gaza? Will they become targets of Hamas militants?
That's a very important question. Are they ready? And I think they'd be the first to recognize that work needs to be done in terms of their technical support, the expertise, the people, and also the importance of ensuring that the immediate needs, which is humanitarian, medical needs, can be addressed, but also the reconstruction needs. And we need to ensure the security element within Gaza is also assured. So again, without unpacking the full detail of this, the short answer to your question is it's very much work in progress and live work in progress as well.
You just come back from Lebanon. Has Hezbollah accepted to go behind the Litani River lines?
Again, that's
what's been accomplished in Lebanon?
I think there's discussions. There's been some movements in that respect, but I think we need that, exactly as you put, that they need to move behind that line to get the security assurances. That also means we extend to the Lebanese armed forces the support that we need. If I can just hone in on that point, actually it was David Cameron, when he was last Prime Minister, that started quite an extensive training program and support program for the Lebanese armed forces. During our visit to Lebanon, apart from meeting the Prime Minister, we also met the General, General Aoun, and we were very much heartened to see the work that's been made in the north of the country.
Yeah, but the problem is Hezbollah,
in the south. And
not,
Hezbollah, of
not
course.
the Lebanese armed
No,
forces.
but you need someone to fill that gap. As Hezbollah move towards the center and the north, you need to ensure that the Lebanese army are also equipped to fully ensure that they can keep the security of their own country. And there's conversations in that respect. The other important role within that in the south is, of course, UNIFIL. We also met with the UNIFIL commander. And yes, there are live discussions to ensure the exact objectives you've outlined can be reached.
Last question, the Red Sea. You've taken part in military strikes against Houthi targets along with the Americans. Will there be more hits on Houthi targets?
Well, I think when we go back just in recent potted history, we were very supportive of the work the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was doing in respect of the peace agreements with the Houthis. Indeed, the United Kingdom, you talked about our shuttle diplomacy. One of the areas we worked on, and I was directly involved, was to bridge the gap between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Nations. And we were in a good place, and that peace agreement we want to see, again, revitalized. However specific, why did we take part in the operation and why are we live in that? This is very much about active protection of commercial routes. The United Kingdom's operations, when HMS Diamond was directly targeted, that's when we intervened. And we also lodged the appropriate Article 51 requirements within the UN. Our view is we don't want to see an escalation with the Houthis. We don't want to see an escalation in the Red Sea. But when you see that 15% of commercial trade went through the Red Sea, it's important that we protect that commercial traffic. The Houthis, and indeed those who support the Houthis, including Iran, we've delivered those messages. Ratchet it down. We do not want to see an escalation.
So can we say you are...
If I may, why were we in Lebanon is to ensure exactly your point on those who have influence over Hezbollah that are talking to them to ratchet this down. Let's not see an escalation. Secondly, with Iran? The Houthis. Yes, of course. I mean, Iran have supported Hamas. They've supported the Houthis and Hezbollah. And it's important that if Iran wants to see some kind of recognition of its role, now is the time to step up and cease supporting these groups and militias that actually operate not just in their region, as we've seen in other parts of the Middle East.
You're in a proxy war with Iran, the West, the UK and the US.
Look, we want to see no escalation. We don't want to see wars escalating in a way which is detrimental. The reason for doing what we're doing, for me, if one thing I've learned in my almost 7 years at the Foreign Office is that ultimately the biggest case we can make, the biggest and most revolutionary thing we can do and achieve for the region, indeed for all of us, is peace. And peace is tough to achieve, but it's a noble objective to have.
Lord Ahmad, thank you for this interview.
Always a pleasure.